Thank you very much. So I have been in publishing for just under 18 months. And I mentioned that to encourage you, if you will, to imagine the perspective of somebody who works in the kitchen of a top-flight restaurant. And one day, one of the waiters who for a various set of reasons perhaps hasn't been working out so well in the front of the restaurant, comes into the kitchen and starts contributing ideas about what the menu should look like. So I encourage you to discount what follows with that perspective. What I'm here to do today in the 4 p.m. slot is provide a compelling final presentation for the afternoon, make everyone feel good and encouraged about the direction of the industry, give you a sort of expansive, broad strokes overview of the topics of the day, and close with a really impartial overview of the industry's direction. So I thought about calling this What I Learned from 18 Months in Publishing, and that perhaps seemed a little bit self-involved, but it struck me because I couldn't have joined the publishing industry at a time in which everyone has nice things to say about big publishers, whether that's from a kind of considered and strategic perspective, or whether it's a certain author's perspective. And the folks at BookNet suggested that I do something called Spotlight Hazlitt, because a few months ago we launched an online magazine called Hazlitt with a mission statement and commissioning editors, which we hired using confusing and misleading postings in industry magazines, but featuring real journalists and freelance writers on topics of contemporary interest, and tying into Random House books and working with Random House authors and HarperCollins authors and Penguin authors and House Venanzi authors and a few others, and work from commissioned illustrators and short films by professional directors and actors, and it's been very well received. We had some lovely national press, and we got some lovely international press, and we got positive coverage from the ever-important BB eBooks Thailand. But to a lot of people, particularly within the industry, it seemed at the time, and I think still seems, irresponsible and unsustainable and bewildering. Because we know that we're supposed to be excited about developing really expensive digital products to get lost in the terrifying discovery odyssey that is the App Store, or the humble but alluring EPUB format. Certainly not in the graveyard of monetization dreams that is online publishing. So I wanted to explain why it seemed like to us, actually, this is the #1 thing that we should be doing right now in terms of digital product development. To do that, I have to start with a little digression about ebooks, because the funny thing about ebooks is that for quite a while the technology was essentially there. And okay, it has some steps to make, but the e-readers that stabilized a few years ago were not radically different in conception from the e-readers that had been around for a while. And ebook files were certainly far more portable than other digital files that got moved around and got an industry around them sooner. And yet, since Amazon really kick-started this ebooks revolution, it's hoisted an impressive set of bogeymen upon the industry. This very conference in former years has had very active discussions around piracy and pricing. And pricing is often, I think, a conversation about the prospect of consumers who go into the ebooks world and then are essentially dead to the traditional value propositions of the book market. And then talking about DRM, which in as much as we've come to talk about it as a possible reinforcer of market share consolidation and therefore pricing, combines both. What we've really been dealing with from a publisher's perspective is a particularly traumatic format shift, and it's required new retail partners and new business models and all kinds of new jobs that didn't exist, but it's a format shift. It's in essence a one-time technology correction that allowed readers, and the same readers, to take advantage of a convenient distribution method as soon as the technology and the value proposition were right. And it's been very traumatic and a lot of hard work, but hopefully at this point we're on the other side of it, and at least we have a sense of how our business engages with that challenge, and our industry business model is intact. And I wish there was an appropriate business metaphor for this kind of situation. Now, I'm not suggesting that digital distribution threatens to replace our fidelity god with a bag of sand, but I think it poses additional long-term challenges that are in some ways even more substantial than changes in format and distribution. In other words, if you begin with the proposition that ebooks are a good start, then what's next? What does that lead you to think about? And I think some of the challenges I'm going to outline are what content discovery really looks like in an era of digital distribution, and what are the implications from business model innovation in neighboring industries, and what is happening to the experience of reading itself. And so what I'm really saying is we should probably be looking over our shoulders at what might happen next. So I'm going to talk about 6 lightweight technologies that I think that we should be watching now. And to prove that this isn't just a esoteric think piece, I'm going to drop in a few actual concrete tips, things that we learned while we were working on randomhouse.ca and Hazlitt, and both of those are still very much in beta. Some things that went right, some things that didn't go quite so right, and some things that we're thinking about as we think about what's next. And my point really is that we need to talk about these things because as the industry continues to change, we're going to have to figure this out together. So let me start with what a lightweight technology is. Generally speaking, a lightweight technology, at least as I'm using it, is managed by somebody who isn't you. Typically, these are software as a service solutions. So it's software that's in the cloud rather than a big, heavy enterprise solution. That's right, Cubism. These kinds of technologies are typically fast to deploy rather than making you kind of buckle under to a really intensive and heavy project rollout plan. They're focused on solving specific problems usually, so you don't have to adapt to a complete taxonomy or a way of working. They can be a little disposable for that reason, which is good. It doesn't cost you too much if you have to move on to something else. And in other words, they're inexpensive, which I figured at 4 p.m. is probably a good message. I have to give credit where credit is due to a lot of these ideas are ideas that come from a lot of really, really smart people in this industry and a lot of really smart people, and this list is by no means extensive, comprehensive of people that I've had the pleasure to work with over the last year or so. So the first one I want to talk about is APIs. And an API is an application programming interface. And if you start to read about APIs, you are going to land in acronym soup, and I promise this is going to get better. What you really need to know is an API is a system or a protocol that enables 2 systems to talk to one another. One to ask questions and another one to receive answers and to go back and forth. And usually there is a big library of assets and a set of instructions about how to access that library, and some kind of security and authentication layer in between to make sure that you are who you say you are. And so what happens is one of the systems has a set of instructions, and it goes and asks the other system, and identifies itself, and the other system says, sure, here's the information you asked for. And if you think you've never seen an API, APIs are the things that power those little share links on every website that you've ever seen, and they are the things that very often make those websites load so slowly. What's in it for you as a user of an API? Well, what you get out of an API is you can make use of the assets that are in that other system's library without having to build lots and lots of really clunky and heavy direct database queries, let alone develop and maintain that resource in the first place. It allows you to focus development on other things while potentially building out a really broad set of things that appeal to your users. And if you're on the other side, your assets are getting displayed and moved around on a platform that you didn't have to maintain. So you're getting exposure that you didn't have to pay to develop. In other words, APIs are multipliers of reach. And they allow you, we could use them, and we do in the book industry, to move metadata around. They allow you to have authors, titles, prices, covers, Canadianness represented on thousands of websites without having to actually manually distribute all of that information. Random House has a really robust set of APIs from bibliographic data and author information and events. And so when we built our new website, we used APIs to power all of the bibliographic data, which is a pretty radical departure from standard practice when you're building these things, because usually you go and build a lot of really heavy database queries that go and tunnel directly into the database. As Hugh Maguire and others have discussed, though, we don't need to stop there. We could use APIs to provide access points into a book, a kind of digital index that would allow other services to provide entry points and use components. And Pearson has been steadily developing a great suite of APIs for reference, cooking, Penguin Classics, travel, all kinds of other resources. This is how a reader could tour London in the company of Charles Dickens or Thomas de Quincey, or could tour Los Angeles in the company of Bret Easton Ellis, as excerpts of text are communicated via an API, some kind of identifier of place, and it could be grafted by another company onto a map service. More radically, if actual publishing assets, like the books themselves, were available through APIs, they could conceivably take away the massive barriers of entry that prevent smaller players from doing things like selling ebooks, and there's a couple of people who've talked about that. But after a certain point, if you start to think about APIs in this way, you really start to blur the line between what is just sending out book data and actually publishing itself. The good news is there's already a ton of APIs available for the book industry. USA Today book reviews you can have on your website or service right now. The New York Times bestseller lists, every aspect of Goodreads community, and it's amazing the thoroughness of things that you'll find in APIs. It's almost like they didn't believe you were going to go to the trouble of reading the instructions or use them in presentations. And if you're using BookNet BiblioShare, you're already providing, you already have an API. So we went through this, and we have one thing that we think that we need when it comes to APIs. We would love to see more Canadian APIs provided by publishers and non-traditional partners. Media, reviews, bestseller lists, author events, which are in Random House's API, but not many others. We believe this is space for a Canadian industry-wide tool that could provide these things. So that's almost the last thing I have to say about APIs. Branding. So why is this distribution of assets helpful or even necessary? I think the way that we've arrived at an ebook market has allowed us to believe that digital distribution is just a further evolution of all the things that have changed in book retail over the last 20 years or more. Longer opening hours, lower prices, faster delivery. But I think that that's misleading, that actually online fulfillment, so the benefits that Amazon and other e-commerce providers brought about in the late 90s and 2000s are not the same as digital distribution. Digital distribution is where ebooks aren't just competing with other ebooks, but Tumblr accounts and Ryan Gosling gifts and lots of blogs and self-published materials. And there's really only a single channel for all of these content types, and it's the internet, and it presents all of us with overwhelming choices all at once, all the time, and it's why the experience of digital consumption can be so overwhelming and frequently so boring. So what solves problems for digital consumers who have to deal with all this stuff? What's the magic genie to solve problems for digital consumers? This is Dave Pell, self-described internet superhero. And Dave Pell publishes Next Draft, which is a daily email newsletter. He calls it a column with links. And he has spoken about the notion that if Web 2.0 was about social media and fabulous aggregation systems that bundled up all of this stuff to show you what your friends were reading or what was most popular, those have become overwhelming too. And the next iteration will be about voice. It'll be about people providing, through individual taste and sensibility, the guideposts through an overwhelming media landscape. We have all these kinds of different recommendation systems for digital content based upon what you've ordered or somebody else with your account has ordered, or similar people to you who have ordered, or based upon what you've put in your virtual library, which, as we all know, is a time-consuming part of your leisure time, based on what everyone you know is enjoying, or some editorial voices. And the example here is a service called Shuffler, which aggregates the choices of music bloggers in specific genres. So these are sources of recommendations, but they're really filters on all of this stuff. And you can classify them, I think, in two ways. The first is behavior and identity confirmation. This is all the stuff that you have done, or the people close to you have done, or people like you have done, and so we can confirm that and give you some other stuff you like. And then there's another set of services which are a little different. They challenge you perhaps, they speak to not who you are or who you have been in your taste, but what you might aspire to be. They enable some risk-taking. And I think that consumers are willing to pay to be surprised, to be challenged, and to show them something that they aspire to. And I think the publishing industry, if our excellent editorial taste is a scarce resource, as we hope, and a core differentiating value, I think that offers an opportunity to reach consumers effectively and directly in digital channels. But we shouldn't be naive about that. That means in digital distribution, offering something alongside the best in class, the organizations that have really specialized in convenience and availability and in price, and the organization that can get you everything you want, whether that's a lawnmower or aluminum bleachers, or Wolfio and Lure, as recommended in the works of Cormac McCarthy. So to do that, you need to be really clear and focused. You need to articulate your core values to consumers. That means a really strong, clear editorial voice in channels. It's not an intermediary. It means that your Twitter voice, and Twitter is the consummate lightweight broadcast technology, has to be manned by somebody who shares your core sensibility and values. And it means a keen sensibility to design, the visual nature of the web, and distributing those assets across every channel that you conduct, and getting a URL shortener. And it means removing the grit from every part of the user experience, so it doesn't feel like they're using a product, but instead expressing themselves. And there's already a handful of really strong players in this space in publishing. Byliner, who've been a leading digital-only publisher since they published John Krakauer's 3 Cups of Deceit in 2011, is a really standout example. And they have this uncompromising focus on branding and voice and user experience. And by the way, book covers don't have to be shaped like book covers if you aren't going to glue them onto the front of books. Byliner's identity reaches across platforms, and they really like yellow, and across devices. And this isn't necessarily new to publishers. It's about providing a really participatory experience for a consumer who finds in it an element of identity confirmation, that they can be who they aspire to be. We have a lot of nascent brands in this industry ready to go. I'd point to Anansi as having a really keen sensibility in this area. But the point is that anyone can do it now, including the 26-year-old publishing graduate who has amazing taste and relationship management acumen with writers, and the ability to focus those things on a really singular expression of their identity as they interact with others, and a really cheap production system, and a lot of hustle. And if that sounds really unlikely, then I would just say that we've seen it before, because I think this is exactly what a young Louise Denny's, impatient at the editorial intern career path, could be doing right now. And that's the model I would say is one of the biggest long-term disintermediation risks to publishers, is that strong young voices with none of the traditional publishing infrastructure, with a really strong, clear voice and mission, publishing digital internationally without territorial constraints, and just dropping in print editions with local partners or print on demand. Because if done well, voice scales internationally. And so when we launched Hazlitt, we really sweated this question of branding and design identity. What is the brand identity, and is it consistent with the user experience, with what it should feel like for a user who's interacting with a book publisher who's now also an online publisher? And will that identity and that experience support sales of these co-branded ebook originals to an international market? So that's branding. Now there's Newsstand Apps. This one's kind of flavor of the moment. There's a lot out there about this right now, but I think we need to talk about it because I think it's where a fundamental discussion of value is happening right now with consumers. So as everyone knows, the attempts to monetize web content has largely consisted of ads and paywalls. And with the launch of the iPad, the App Store was briefly championed as this mechanism that would allow magazine and newspaper publishers to finally monetize their content by charging a monthly subscription rate to have a beautiful edition delivered to your device at a price that you'd be willing to pay. And there've been just 3 problems. The first one is the beautiful editions. Because now you're building 2 or 3 versions of the same page instead of 1 to make an iPad or an iPhone version look exactly as beautifully laid out as a print magazine without hiring anybody else to do it. And the second problem is it's delivered to your device. But these things are 85 megabytes and they're huge file sizes. And then sometimes some shortfalls in revenue against expectations. Which isn't to say that none of these have worked. There are some prominent magazines that have really stable and growing digital subscriptions, but that's really the heavyweight model of tablet publishing. Part of the problem was discovery, and Apple tried to do something about it by introducing this Newsstand app, which is kind of it's a virtual app, which is a shelf of all of your magazine subscriptions in one place, with these tiny pokey covers, which are shrunken down versions of the latest print edition. At the end of last year, an iOS developer named Marco Arment, who built Tumblr, launched a lean, lightweight iPhone and iPad magazine called The Magazine. And it is light on images, since added a few. It downloads fast. It publishes 5 articles in an issue every 2 weeks. It scrolls like the web instead of paging through painstakingly laid out individual pages. It focuses on technology and lifestyle. It costs only a couple of dollars a month, and the subscriptions almost immediately cover the operating costs, including editorial. And it's been somewhat widely imitated, largely to a niche subscriber base. There's a music writer named Maura Johnston who started Maura magazine with the same model. Craig Mott has called this trend subcompact publishing. Lightweight, inexpensive, born of the web, and perhaps a mechanism to monetize an RSS feed. But my point is there's actually a huge amount of experimentation coming out of newspapers and magazines. Andrew Sullivan has started his own paywall based a little bit on New York Times restored leaky paywall with a limited number of previews. There are political news websites starting membership areas for exclusive content. There is a Kickstarter-funded digital magazine called Matter focusing on investigative journalism. By the way, if you really want to see innovation in business model, check out the publishing projects on Kickstarter. And Matter publishes stories in this really lean, readable web interface at 99 cents each, available through ebook retailers too, or on a membership model. And these are mostly small, focused products and audiences. This innovation is being driven by newspapers and magazines people who are fighting for their livelihoods. And book publishing could be making use of some of these business models. And some are. Melville House launched a subscription series for their novella series, print and digital, in a variety of formats. Byliner's subscription model not only makes their 50-plus ebook originals series available, but also now contains classic magazine articles that the rights holders like Esquire and GQ have exclusively moved behind Byliner's paywall, making them effectively a retailer. Joseph Pine and James Gilmore wrote this book called The Experience Economy, and they talked about how you get from the raw commodities of a cup of coffee, which may cost 1 or 2 cents for a cup, to a $4 Starbucks purchase. And they've argued it's because consumers are willing to pay for participation in an experience. And I think that that's what we're seeing now in the emergence of these small products and services. It's an important conversation. It's happening with readers right now about value. Yes, it's about the content, but it's about formulating the value proposition of that experience and doing so under the umbrella of a brand and an identity that's as meaningful for a customer as it is helpful to a publisher. Now, you could say, well, this might be stretching the definition of lightweight here. We're still talking about apps, and apps are expensive. But many of these have just foregone the expensive app development route and are simply publishing to the web with lean device-optimized displays. But for Newsstand Apps, there's now already white label providers. So, Newsstand Apps. Now, if this approach, publishing directly to a public, appeals, then one way or the other, you're going to have to be publishing on the web. And I didn't really want to talk about content management systems a lot because I feel like this room, if any room in the industry, knows just what they are, but just in case. They're the really unglamorous things that turn this into this without you having to go through this again and again and again and again. And then if you have to do a design change, having to update every single web page you ever published. And content management systems would include WordPress and Drupal and Squarespace and Expression Engine and Joomla, and they always look so tremendously friendly, and Joomla has balloons or gears or something. And I wouldn't even mention these, except that I know that there are some publishers of significant size who, when they want to update their website, have developers hand code HTML and upload it to staging servers for overnight scheduled copying to production servers. So all I'm saying is, if in your professional responsibilities you know what Dreamweaver is, then you know what I'm talking about. Content management systems have moved on a lot, and they range from really lean blogging systems to website management tools and online production systems. And some of them have these easy to install plugins and modules that are centrally maintained or through communities of developers that allow you to do exactly the kind of web publishing that I was just outlining. And they're potentially incredibly powerful production tools. And in some organizations, the only person that's using them is the marketing intern. A brief digression for the CMS nerds here. For Hazlitt and randomhouse.ca, we're using a Drupal instance that powers this modular front page that we can move around like a newspaper page. And it powers the core magazine aspects, except where there are these book callouts, like at the bottom right, where we go and duck into the Random House APIs. And the merchandising pages are built in Drupal using assets from the APIs. But so we don't do too many API calls every single page load. They're cached in Drupal while the page is built, and they get refreshed regularly. And then we have pages like this that look simple, but are actually doing some really clever stuff where they're aggregating together on the fly API calls and stuff from our content management system. And that's really all anyone would ever want to know about that, except we've learned that there's plenty of query optimization that we could do to make it run a little bit faster, especially search. So, enough of that. Why should you really care about content management systems? Any content management system will let you publish to RSS, but there's been some work done by John Maxwell and a team out of SFU, and then built on by Hugh Maguire and others for a service called Pressbooks that would allow you to actually publish out of a content management system directly into EPUB. So in that sense, your content management system could become your production system for ebooks, which is a pretty tantalizing prospect if you've developed a cadence for online publishing, and we now have hundreds of high-quality pieces after only 6 months of publishing Hazlitt. So we're excited about that, which you can't do with Dreamweaver. So that's content management systems. Real-time analytics tools. So it feels like this year's piracy or pricing discussion is big data, and its tremendously exciting and glossy implications. But you can argue that we as an industry face a few challenges in how to deploy its insights. Although we certainly don't lack for data. We have point of sale data we receive from retailers and often aggregated and distributed by third parties, or actually Booknet. Consumer surveys that are run by third parties and actually Booknet. Social media and community membership behavior, and web traffic. And as an industry, we all have almost all of that. Some of the challenges around institutional culture, one that doesn't valorize data-driven decision-making, and access is a really severe problem. Access to internal data systems is often stuck behind really expensive business licenses. which means it's locked up in IT departments and operational specialists. And so you get this internal information specialists who are like readers of bones and entrails. They're the soothsayers. And all that gets in the way of the really gritty work that is building an analytics culture that you can participate in quick business decisions. So you need to get information from multiple sources, multiple types of sources. You've got to get it housed in some kind of accessible system, do it in a way that everyone's fluent in how to get it back. You need to do some basic hygiene with the data, like if it comes back and it's missing pub date and that's something you might want to drill down on, you have to put that back in. Then you need to aggregate and link your data sources so that you can work across them. And then that's just getting ready, because then you need to analyze it and get some insights from the interaction of multiple variables and drill down into causative factors and present it in a really clear and intuitive fashion and promote institutional data literacy in your organization through expertise and build some operational fluency. But we have a bigger challenge than that, and that's our product cycle. So we have a writer who has a draft of a manuscript, who engages an agent who represents the manuscript and takes it to a publisher who acquires it. And then the writer and the publisher work together and get a finished manuscript. And then the publisher goes through that intensely frenzied hard work to get it through production and to sell it to retail accounts, and the retailers buy it. And then the publishers market it, and the retailers are selling it, and the customers are finally buying it. And then we start to get some information and start to analyze that information and what is it telling us about how readers are reading this book, and how is it resonating with them, and when are they buying it, and are there any secondary characters that they might be particularly engaged by that we could tell the author maybe this should be the next book. And we're doing all of this with participation with the retailers. And then finally we have some insights that, you know what, we're about ready to start to talk to the author about. Maybe here are some things that you could fold into the next book. So we speak to the agent and say, can we set up a meeting? And the agent says, that's fantastic, because they have almost finished the draft of their next book. Or the agent says, that's too bad, because they right now are suffering from writer's block and it's going to be quite a while. And all of that is grossly oversimplified, and my apologies to everyone who works in the industry in any of those roles. But the point is, we need faster ways to get consumer insights back to writers. And so what if it looked like this? Supposing a publisher was permanently publishing and always looking for insights into what is working and what isn't, and continually assessing and guiding and giving feedback. And that's why we think we should publish daily on a wide range of topics and a wide range of voices, and constantly watch the stats in real time using technologies like Go Squared and Mint to see what people are looking at on the site right at this minute. And when I say that, there's somebody at the office who's probably looking to see, because he's obsessive, whether there are people in Thailand reading it right now. But then there's also the really rich behavior and conversion drill downs you can get through Google Analytics and the enterprise level web stats solutions like Omniture and Site Catalyst. And if that sounds really impressive, we are nowhere near being able to actually do that. Because the data is still too new and we don't have the processes yet. We're still building an editorial identity, so we're not going to trade raw traffic for the right kind of traffic that would let us draw conclusions. And we don't yet have a consensus about goals and what constitutes conversion when it comes to building analytic feedback. But we do need to build the cadences whereby information can arrive at the beginning and throughout the publishing strategy, rather than just in a post-mortem exercise after sales. It's almost like at this extended moment of change, we should be focusing on the data that we throw away, the transient data, the data that changes and decays moment to moment, what readers are doing at this second, rather than data that might make us ossify practices or entrench received wisdom. And I'd argue that this kind of fluency is critical. Not everyone in the organization has to be able to read SQL or have a Tableau license on their desktop, but some basic fluency with tools that allow query and drill down into POS data or web traffic would really help contextualize insights drawn from more extensive dives. All of which to say, I think that means that everyone should have analytics logins. We need to start to think about this in the sense of publishing as the cultivation and understanding of a public, and that means knowing who they are from moment to moment. So I want to close on a kind of cultural technology, and I was delighted to discover that people have actually built replica Arks of the Covenant. You can order one on eBay. I've been speaking about ways to reach readers of the future through radically different distribution and discovery channels and how to learn from them. But then there's also the notion that they will be different readers. And the truth is, we don't, as a culture or as an industry, yet know why the optimal narrative experience 3,000 years ago was epic poetry. By the way, everyone should own this book. Or why 150 years ago it was a serialized novel, or what it's even going to be in 15 years' time, although it's starting to feel like it might be the 13-part television season. But this is probably some confluence of cultural requirements and distribution technology and engagement with previous models of narrative. And the author or the authors who take these conditions and then instinctively or by calculation blend them with a really unique storytelling voice are going to be the authors that resonate most strongly. Now, I think in the narrow view, this suggests that that we should provide interactivity. And the idea seems to be that if there are devices that allow interactivity, that will train readers to expect interaction as an experience, and I don't think that's quite right. The companies that are doing this best, like Touch Press, are doing excellent illustration. Not interactivity for its own sake, but illustration as a pretty well-established set of user experiences that's improved by this technology. It's not beleaguering the reader with multiple touches and multiple calls on their attention or asking them to drive the narrative. Those things aren't actually books. That's a way to reimagine Choose Your Own Adventure because you miss it so much. But those things which are highly active motor experiences, but intellectually passive experience, those aren't books. Those are really bad video games. And the thing is that digital consumers are virtuosos of narrative. They're very used to juxtaposition as narrative abbreviation, and they grew up on music videos, so they know all about missing information and chance relationships between things that don't make any sense. They're used to filling in the gaps between the Twitter-friendly headline and the substantive body copy and the SEO-catching link. They're used to completing causative sequence. They grew up in video games, and they're used to waiting for the narrative payoff, and they're used to handling complex causative sequences with multiple motivating agents. They don't need to be told where to tap. Reading is an imaginatively active experience. It's not necessarily a physically active one. And building gestural interactions into every book that we can think of is not the solution. What we need to bring tomorrow's writers to tomorrow's readers is experimentation. We probably need more experimental fiction imprints, and we need writers to experiment using software solutions. They can interact with the structure and the shape of their narratives, whether that's mixing software for writers, like Scrivener, or whether it's outlining software. We need to bring stories to market as fast as possible so we can see what's working, and we need to help writers get to where the readers are going to be. So, in conclusion, Hazlitt is giving us a way to expand our digital services packages to authors, to reach readers in new ways, to learn from them, to experiment in web publishing. There is a model of publishing right now that says that no other participants are necessary than the author and the reader and some fulfillment agent in the middle. That agent handles credit card transactions and delivers the assets. And whoever or whatever that agent might be, when this model is articulated, it's not a publisher. And I've deliberately chosen those images because I think the model is already outdated. I think digital distribution has already shown us that this model can't work. But the justification for this model is that it removes inefficiencies, it removes gatekeepers. And in this model, the book that doesn't find its audience at once doesn't deserve to make it. There's a rival viewpoint, and that's that not every writer finds their voice or wins a major award or reshapes the culture with their first book. And a nonfiction book that takes 4 years to research still needs to be funded and published. So if we're serious in our commitment to writers and to readers, then that means that publishing is a mission, not a process, and it means cultivating a public, and it means sharing our passion. Thank you.